Back in the late 80s and 90s, I worked as a truck driver. To clarify, I wasn't your stereotypical, flannel-wearing, large Marge from the movies. I'm not saying I was some runway model or the smallest woman in the world, but I didn't exactly fit into that caricature of a female trucker. It was a hard but independent life, and I liked it that way. At the time, I didn't even have a permanent place to live. I'd sometimes stay at my mom's between runs, but mostly, I spent my nights in the small apartment-like space at the back of my cab. It was my little corner of stability in an otherwise constantly moving world. Truck stops became a sort of community for me. I'd spend days at a time parked at one if there was a gap between jobs, and I never really had issues. The male truckers treated me like one of them, and I didn't feel out of place or unsafe. Rest areas, however, were a different story. They felt more isolated, less secure. But when you're behind the wheel and exhaustion hits, you don't always have the luxury of choosing where to stop. One night, I was driving and started to feel that heavy, unmistakable pull of sleep. I've been making good time and figured I could afford a rest, so I decided to pull over at the next rest area. There weren't many vehicles there when I arrived, just a few scattered cars, and the building was empty. After using the restroom and grabbing a drink from the vending machine, I headed back to my truck, climbed into the back, and settled in for the night. I fell asleep quickly, but sometime later, I was woken by an odd scraping sound. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent, enough to grate on my nerves. It reminded me of nails on a chalkboard, but duller, as if someone were dragging something metal or sharp against the side of my truck. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was just the wind or something harmless, but the sound wouldn't stop. It wasn't until it suddenly ceased that I finally managed to drift off again. A little while later, the noise returned. This time, it was even more aggravating, cutting through the quiet night like an unwanted guest. Frustrated, I reached into my purse, grabbed some earplugs, and shoved them in. The relief was instant. I couldn't hear a thing, and I went back to sleep, thinking that would be the end of it. But then I woke up again, and this time, everything was silent. There were no scraping noises, no creaks or groans, just an eerie stillness. I wasn't sure what had woken me, but I had the strange feeling that something wasn't right. As I lay there, trying to figure it out, I felt it, a hand on my thigh. I froze, my breath caught in my throat as I tried to process what was happening. In the dim light coming through the curtains, I could see movement. Someone's hand was retreating through the partially open curtain that separated the sleeping area from the cab. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I ripped the earplugs out and strained to listen. I could hear shuffling noises. Someone was in the cab of my truck. My mind raced. How had they gotten in? My stomach dropped as I realized I probably hadn't locked the door. It was something I rarely thought about when parking at a rest area. I pulled myself together and peeked through the curtain just in time to see the driver's side door open. The intruder slipped out into the night, disappearing before I could get a good look at them. Adrenaline coursed through me as I climbed into the front seat and jumped out of the truck, scanning the dark rest area for any sign of them. In hindsight, running outside was probably a reckless move, but I was too terrified and angry to think straight. I needed to see who had invaded my space. The lot was quiet, almost too quiet. I circled the truck, heart pounding, feeling like someone was watching me. Then, as I crouched to look under the trailer, I saw them. Their feet and legs were on the other side of the truck, standing just out of sight. I leaned further to get a better look, and they leaned too, our eyes locking for a brief, horrifying second. That was it. I bolted back into the cab, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My hands shook as I started the truck, my only thought being to get as far away as possible. I didn't care if I had to run them over. They had crossed the line, and I wasn't about to stick around to see what they do next. I drove to the next rest area, constantly checking my mirrors for any signs of a car following me. When I finally stopped, I was too rattled to sleep properly. I stayed in the cab, keeping the doors locked and a flashlight in hand. When morning came, I stepped out to inspect the truck. That's when I noticed the scratches. Long, deliberate marks ran down the side of the cab, as if someone had taken a metal rake or sharp tool and dragged it along the surface. That must have been the noise I'd heard during the night. To this day, I don't know who it was or what they wanted. Were they just trying to scare me? Was it some kind of prank or something more sinister? The not knowing is almost worse than the event itself. It left me shaken and paranoid for weeks, constantly looking over my shoulder. I learned a hard lesson that night. Never let your guard down, even when you think you're safe. In my 30 years as a truck driver, I've seen just about everything. The open road has a way of throwing the unexpected at you, and while I miss the freedom and adventure of it, there are some experiences I'm glad to leave behind. One of those happened during a cross-country trip, and it's something I'll never forget. I've always been the kind of guy who doesn't mind picking up hitchhikers. I'm a big guy, capable of taking care of myself, so I never worried about the risks. Most of the people I picked up were harmless. Oddballs, sure, but nothing dangerous. I liked helping people out, especially those walking along the highway in need of a ride. It felt good to lend a hand. This particular trip was taking me through the middle states on my way to California. The weather was turning, and I could see lightning flashing in the distance. It wasn't long before I caught up with the storm. The wind was fierce, rocking the trailer as I drove. I can still remember the feeling of the truck swaying in the gusts, the thunder rumbling overhead. It was one of those nights where the road felt alive, unpredictable. Up ahead, I spotted someone walking along the side of the road. They weren't hitchhiking, no thumb out, no sign, but I figured they could use a ride. Storms in that part of the country can be brutal, and I couldn't imagine anyone wanting to walk through it. I pulled up alongside them and rolled down the window to offer a ride. It was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. She hesitated at first, looking like she might decline, but after a moment, she climbed up into the cab. She was small and plain-looking, dressed in jeans, a t-shirt, and a light jacket. She carried a green backpack and had an air of nervousness about her, like she was used to blending into the background of life. I'm the kind of guy who can talk to anyone, whether they want to talk or not. She didn't say much, didn't even give me her name at first, but that didn't bother me. I filled the silence with stories about myself, my work, the places I'd been. I figured if I kept the conversation going, it would make things less awkward. Even though she didn't talk, her mannerisms spoke volumes. She seemed shy, maybe even scared, and I chalked it up to the storm or the fact that she was in a stranger's truck. I didn't press her, just kept talking, trying to make her feel comfortable. After a while, she started rummaging through her backpack. I paused for a moment, curious about what she was doing. She noticed me watching and gave me a strange look, so I turned away and kept talking, sneaking glances out of the corner of my eye. I didn't feel creepy for doing it. She was in my truck, after all. I had every right to be curious. Then, out of nowhere, she lunged at me. I barely had time to react as a knife buried itself into the seat beside me. If I hadn't been watching her, I might not have dodged in time. Shocked, I swerved slightly, but managed to keep the truck steady. My mind raced. What was happening? Why was she attacking me? The next few moments were a blur of adrenaline and terror. She pulled the knife out of the seat and stabbed at me again, grazing me this time. I knew I had to stop the truck, but slamming on the brakes wasn't an option. A sudden stop in a truck that size could cause a serious accident. I had to fend her off while slowing down safely, which was easier said than done. Finally, I managed to bring the truck to a stop, but she didn't stop. She kept stabbing at me, her movements wild and erratic. I tried to grab her wrists, but she was quick, switching the knife from one hand to the other. It was a dangerous game of cat and mouse, and I knew one wrong move could end badly. After a struggle, I managed to grab one of her wrists. With my free hand, I opened a driver's side door, ready to pull her out and throw her onto the side of the road. But she wasn't stupid. She dropped the knife from the hand I was holding and picked it up with her other hand, nearly catching me off guard. I grabbed both of her wrists, holding her tightly as she kicked and screamed. Her screams were the first words she'd spoken all night, and they were incoherent, filled with rage and desperation. I dragged her across the road, her feet scraping against the pavement, and threw her into a ditch. She scrambled to get up, but I was already back in the truck, locking the doors. I grabbed her backpack and tossed it across the road, far enough to keep her distracted while I started the engine and drove off. The rest of the night was a blur. I kept an eye on my mirrors, half expecting her to follow me, but the road stayed empty. When I reached the next rest area, I inspected the truck and found scratches along the side of the cab. They looked like they'd been made with a handheld rake or some kind of sharp tool. It must have been her, marking the truck before she climbed in. The thought sent chills down my spine. I don't know what her motive was. Maybe she was just trying to scare me, or maybe it was something darker. Not knowing makes it even more unsettling. But I didn't let that experience stop me from picking up hitchhikers. Some people genuinely need help, and I wasn't going to let one bad apple ruin it for everyone. Helping people was part of who I was, and I wasn't about to change that.